The Galactic Alliance had never been this disjointed. Across the vast expanse of space, hundreds of different species had gathered for an emergency summit, convened in response to the sudden silence of Earth. On a towering citadel orbiting the gas giant Anithra, representatives from dozens of worlds sat in tense discussion, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow of holographic screens. Commander Tavrock of the Reiner was the first to speak, his sharp, reptilian features twisting in frustration. "We are wasting time," he growled, his voice reverberating across the council chamber. "Earth's silence is not just an anomaly. This is a deliberate act. We should be preparing for retaliation. The humans have found a way to cripple our communication grid, and we do not know why." The Fervin, a race of intelligent, telepathic moth-like beings, exchanged glances with each other before one of their leaders, Tavrak, spoke up. "I disagree," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We have studied Earth's history. They have faced extinction-level threats before. They are resilient. Their silence is more likely a symptom of internal chaos, something they are dealing with, not us." But Tavrock wasn't convinced. Internal chaos or not, Earth was always the most unpredictable species. If they are now capable of shutting down our entire communications network, then we must assume they are a far greater threat than we ever anticipated. The Alliance is already divided, and Earth may be the reason for that. If they have weaponized their planet's defense systems, we are at war. The meeting became a cacophony of raised voices and accusations, each species pulling in different directions. Some wanted to invade, others insisted on diplomacy, but no one could agree on a course of action. This was a crossroads none of them had ever expected. The humans, who were often dismissed as primitive, had suddenly forced the entire galaxy to reconsider their place in the universe. Back on Earth, Faye Albright stood in front of a large console in a hidden underground facility in Colorado, staring at the data scrolling across her screen. She was a communications expert for the Unified Global Task Force, a secretive branch of the United Nations designed to monitor potential extraterrestrial threats. The silence had come as a shock to her, too. For days, all channels had been down. Every single communication from Earth to the stars had vanished. Faye's fingers danced across the console, trying to make sense of the chaos. "What's happening, Mason?" she muttered under her breath. Behind her, Mason Brooks, a strategist and former military officer, leaned in to examine the data. "It's like the whole world just shut down. No signals, no transmissions, and none of our systems are working." Faye's brow furrowed. "It's not a glitch. Earth didn't just lose contact with the galaxy. We cut off contact." She turned to him, her voice tight. "And if we did that, then someone, or something, has the power to shut us out completely." Mason's eyes narrowed as he processed the implications. "And what if that something is us?" Faye sat hunched over the console, her fingers flying across the keys as she ran diagnostics for the 100th time. The data was a mess, an incomprehensible web of broken signals and corrupted transmissions. She toggled between multiple screens, trying to trace the anomaly back to its source. But no matter how she tried, the signal was nowhere to be found. "I don't get it," Faye muttered, frustration seeping into her voice. "We've got a global blackout, but it's not a natural one. It's deliberate, Mason. Someone, or something, did this." Mason stood behind her, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold. "Are you sure it's not just a system failure? A technical glitch?" Faye shook her head. "I've checked every possible angle. This isn't a glitch. The entire global network, all communications with satellites, the deep space relay stations, they've been wiped clean. It's like the whole world's been disconnected from everything else." Mason frowned, his mind racing. And if Earth's been cut off, who would be powerful enough to do that? The air in the room grew thick with unease. Mason's words echoed the question that Faye had been turning over in her mind all night. Who or what could sever a planet's link to the galaxy itself? The Singularity Project, A global defense initiative that had been buried for decades seemed like the most plausible answer. But if the rumors were true, if what Mason had said about Earth being capable of weaponizing itself was even remotely accurate, Faye didn't know if that was a blessing or a curse. "We need to dig deeper," Faye said, her voice quiet but determined. "There's something going on under the surface. We need to find out what's really happening." Mason sighed, reluctantly agreeing. "Where do we even begin?" Faye paused, chewing on her lip. Then her gaze flickered to the stack of old files sitting in the corner of her desk. "Project Eclipse," she said. "It's an old defense initiative, supposedly shut down a long time ago, but I've seen mentions of it in classified files. If Earth's defense systems are really the reason for this blackout, then Eclipse might be the key." Mason raised an eyebrow. "I've never heard of it." "I wasn't supposed to," she replied with a wry smile. "It's buried, but I've managed to get my hands on some old intel. It's a global contingency plan, something far beyond our normal defense systems. The kind of tech that could not only protect us from a hostile alien force, but potentially isolate us from the galaxy entirely." Her heart raced. She hadn't fully grasped the implications of Project Eclipse until now, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. If the project had been activated, it would explain the sudden blackout. But who or what would have triggered it? Before Mason could respond, Faye's console beeped loudly. A new signal appeared on the screen, an encrypted transmission, faint and broken, but unmistakably human. "Wait," she said, her voice tight with surprise. "I'm getting something." Mason leaned in. "Is it from Earth?" "No," she replied, eyes narrowing. "It's from beyond Earth. Someone's trying to reach us." The encrypted transmission flickered across Faye's screen, its frequency fluctuating, almost like a distress call. Faye leaned in, her fingers poised above the keyboard. She had been monitoring Earth's deep space communications channels for years, but this signal was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was faint, distorted, and yet unmistakably human. "Can you clean it up?" Mason asked, his voice taut with expectation. "I'm trying," Faye murmured, adjusting the frequency filters. The static hissed, and for a moment, it sounded like gibberish, until, almost imperceptibly, the voice of a man cut through the distortion. "Must respond immediately. Threat. Earth." Faye's eyes widened. She tapped at the keyboard, enhancing the signal. "Who is this? What are they saying?" The voice continued, but now the words were clearer. "This is a warning. The galaxy is coming. Protect Earth at all costs. Do not." And then, the transmission ended abruptly, leaving behind a chilling silence. "Damn it," Faye whispered, staring at the blank screen. "They were trying to warn us. But from who? And why are they?" Before she could finish her thought, the ground beneath them trembled. Mason staggered back as the walls of the underground facility shook with an earth-shattering force. It wasn't an earthquake. The rumble was too deep, too deliberate. "What the hell was that?" Mason exclaimed, gripping the nearest support column. Faye's heart skipped a beat. Her mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. "It's happening," she muttered, as her mind raced. The transmission, the tremors, the sudden, eerie silence. Everything pointed to one horrifying conclusion. The invasion had begun. Across the galaxy, Commander Tavrock's fleet was already in motion. His ship, the Karakar, a warship the size of a small moon, was the flagship of a fleet of hundreds. The Reiner were not a species that took threats lightly, and Tavrock had been vocal about his concerns for months. He knew the silence from Earth wasn't a mistake. His fleet was prepared for retaliation, ready to strike the moment the signal from Earth vanished. Tavrock stood at the command center of the Karakar, his reptilian eyes narrowed as he surveyed the holographic map of Earth's solar system. The human planet was isolated, shielded from the rest of the galaxy's communications, but Tavrock had anticipated this moment. The first wave of invasion ships was already on their way. They thought they could hide. Tavrock muttered, his voice thick with contempt. Now they will learn the price of defying the Reiner. Commander, said Lieutenant Sulkov, his second in command, the fleet is ready to strike. Tavrock nodded, his sharp claws tapping against the command console. Begin the assault. We will show them the consequences of cutting off the Galactic Alliance. Earth will fall before sunset. With a flick of his wrist, Tavrock activated the invasion sequence. The fleet surged forward, streaking through the stars with deadly intent, leaving no room for negotiation. Back on Earth, Faye was still trying to process the transmission when the alarms blared, their deafening wail cutting through the underground facility. Get to the surface. Now. Mason ordered, already moving toward the exit. Faye hesitated for a moment, heart pounding. The transmission, the tremors, and now the attack. Everything was happening so fast. She had no idea what was coming next, but one thing was clear. Earth was no longer safe. And whatever it was that had just set its sights on Earth, it wasn't interested in negotiation. The tremors had barely stopped when Faye and Mason made their way up to the surface, the air outside thick with tension. The emergency systems at the facility kicked in, and the dim red emergency lights flickered above them as they raced toward the exit. As Faye pushed open the heavy steel doors, she was met with the harsh glare of the midday sun. She shielded her eyes, trying to focus on the chaos unfolding around her. Fighter jets soared overhead, streaking across the sky, engaging in dogfights with strange, sleek alien ships. The sky itself was thick with the telltale signs of an invasion. Trails of smoke and fire where ships had been shot down, scattered wreckage falling to Earth's surface. The world was waking up to a nightmare. We need to get to the data vault, Faye said, pulling her jacket tighter around her. The urgent need to find answers now outweighed everything else. There's something buried beneath the surface, something we missed in the early scans. Project Eclipse. It has to be linked to this. Mason nodded, but his face was grim. Eclipse was an old theory, abandoned long before we were born. Everyone thought it was just a failed defense program. But if it's somehow connected to all of this, we need to understand it before it's too late. The two of them made their way through the facility's underground tunnels, which were now eerily silent, the usual hum of machinery replaced by the distant rumble of ongoing battles. Finally, they reached a hidden access point. A large steel door, sealed tight with a coded lock, loomed in front of them. Faye's fingers flew over the interface panel, inputting a sequence of commands she'd memorized from old Intel files. The doors slid open with a heavy metallic groan, revealing a darkened chamber filled with rows of dormant servers. She felt the weight of what she was about to uncover pressing down on her chest. "This is it," she said quietly, as she moved to a central terminal, her heart racing. Project Eclipse was more than a defense system. It was a containment project, meant to prevent an extraterrestrial force from ever reaching Earth. Mason furrowed his brow. Containment? Who or what are we containing? Before Faye could answer, a holographic map flickered to life on the terminal screen, showing Earth's global defense network, and then zooming in on a section deep below the Nevada desert. It was a massive facility, sprawling and interconnected, much larger than any standard military complex. "This," Faye said, voice tight with realization, "is where they buried the Singularity." The Singularity, an advanced quantum AI, had been designed to defend Earth from the most extreme extraterrestrial threats. But Faye had never realized its full purpose until now. It wasn't just a defense system. It was a guardian, a consciousness capable of manipulating space-time, designed to block hostile forces from breaching Earth's atmosphere, even blocking entire realities. It could isolate the planet from the rest of the galaxy entirely. Faye felt a cold chill run down her spine. "It's not just Earth's safety that's at risk," she whispered. "We've been hiding from something far more dangerous." Mason was silent for a moment, processing the implications. "You mean, the reason we're cut off? It's not just a defense mechanism. It's containment. We're hiding from something. Before Faye could respond, an alert sounded on the terminal. A new set of data was incoming. A satellite feed. "Look at this," Mason said, pointing to the screen. Faye's heart stopped. The feed displayed a live image of an enormous swirling anomaly, something unnatural, hovering just outside Earth's orbit. The image was shaky, distorted, but unmistakable. A massive ship, blacker than the void itself, hovering like a predator circling its prey. "Whatever we're keeping out," Faye murmured. "It's here now." Faye's mind raced as the image of the massive ship swam on the screen. The object was beyond anything human technology could have created. Black as night, its surface shimmered with an otherworldly sheen that distorted the stars around it. The size was impossible to calculate from the satellite feed, but it appeared to stretch for miles, a silent leviathan hanging in the vacuum of space. Mason leaned in, his voice tense. "Is that a ship? That thing's enormous." "It's not just a ship," Faye said, her voice hollow. "It's the Devourer." The name hit Mason like a physical blow. He blinked, confused. "The Devourer? What the hell is that?" Faye turned to him, her face pale. "An ancient race, one that's been around for longer than recorded history. They're called the Devourer because that's what they do. They consume entire worlds. Not just the resources, not just the people. Everything. Life, energy, even time itself." Mason felt a chill as the weight of her words sank in, and we've been hiding from them. How? Why? Faye's fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up more data. The Singularity was built as a last-ditch defense, a way to lock Earth away from the rest of the galaxy. The original purpose of Project Eclipse wasn't just to protect humanity from invasion. It was meant to isolate Earth completely from the Devourer. Her words hung in the air, heavy with a terrifying truth. The Devourer has been hunting for Earth for centuries. We've been hiding, keeping ourselves off the galactic radar. The Singularity was meant to keep them out, an impenetrable shield that could bend space and time. But now, her voice trailed off. "Now they've found us," Mason finished for her, his jaw clenched. "The Devourer is here, and we're the next meal." Faye nodded grimly, eyes fixed on the glowing map. "We were never meant to be alone in the galaxy, Mason. The Singularity wasn't just Earth's defense system. It was a containment unit, a means of keeping us safe from a threat that was beyond anything any species could withstand. The Devourer's entire existence revolves around consuming worlds, and now they've tracked us down." The ground shook beneath them again, more violently this time. Outside, the sky had turned a sickly shade of purple, as if the very atmosphere was reacting to the alien presence. The warships in the distance flickered on and off, disintegrating in midair as Earth's defenses tore into them. Tevrak's fleet had been decimated, but that didn't matter now. "We have to shut it down," Mason said urgently. "If the Singularity is the only thing keeping Earth safe from the Devourer, we need to shut it down. It's our only chance." Faye hesitated, her fingers hovering over the terminal. "Shut it down. We don't even understand how it works. If we tamper with it, we could make things worse." Mason looked her square in the eye. "Do you think this?" He gestured toward the distant skies, where the enormous shadow of the Devourer loomed. "Is going to get better if we wait around. We need to act. Now." Faye stared at the data in front of her, every part of her instinctively screaming against the idea of dismantling the system that had kept Earth hidden for so long. But Mason was right. The Devourer was here, and if they didn't act soon, Earth might be the next meal in its endless hunger. "We don't have much time," Faye said, a sudden sense of clarity piercing through her. She turned to Mason, determination hardening in her voice. "Let's find a way to control it." The deep hum of the underground facility seemed to resonate through the walls as Faye and Mason sprinted down the dimly lit hallways, their footsteps echoing in the tense silence. They were heading straight for the core of the Singularity system, a massive chamber buried beneath the Nevada desert, well beyond the reach of conventional military forces. If there was any chance of shutting it down, of taking control of the singularity, they needed to reach the heart of it before the Devourer overwhelmed them. Faye's thoughts raced as she ran. Containment. That was what the singularity had been built for, to keep the Devourer out. But if Earth was to survive, they had to take the risk of letting it in, at least for long enough to learn how to fight back. Mason, Faye panted, glancing over her shoulder. If we do this, there's no going back. We're going to be opening a direct link to the Devourer. We don't even know if we can control it once we disable the singularity. I know, Mason said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. But we can't just sit here waiting for them to destroy everything. If we don't try, we'll lose. I don't care if we're risking everything. We've got to act. Faye nodded, though her heart weighed heavy. They had no choice now. The only way to survive was to understand their enemy. And that meant opening the floodgates to the very thing that had been sealed away for centuries. Finally, they reached the control room. A towering steel door stood in front of them, its security code requiring multiple layers of biometric scanning. Faye quickly worked the access panel, her hands shaking slightly as she entered the override code she had memorized from the files. A second later, the door slid open with a low rumble, revealing a cavernous room filled with rows of dormant machines, their blinking lights a quiet reminder of the power hidden within. In the center of the room stood the core of the singularity, a massive crystalline structure, pulsing with an eerie blue light. Faye approached cautiously, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "This is it," she whispered, "the heart of Earth's defense. If we shut this down, we'll be exposed. The Devourer will know exactly where we are." Mason stepped forward, his expression resolute. "We don't have a choice. Let's just hope we can figure out how to use it against them once we open the connection." Faye took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the activation panel. For a moment, she hesitated. The weight of what she was about to do threatened to crush her resolve. But then, she pressed the button. A surge of energy rippled through the room, and the crystalline core began to hum, its blue light flashing brighter. The walls around them shuddered as the singularity came to life, sending a ripple through Earth's atmosphere. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then, a series of cryptic symbols began flashing on the central console. "The link is open," Faye said, voice trembling. "We're connected to them. The Devourer can hear us." At that moment, the floor beneath them cracked, and a voice, deep, ancient, and filled with an unfathomable hunger, echoed through the chamber. "You have awakened me." The voice reverberated through the control room, its deep timbre like the rumble of distant thunder. "You have awakened me." Faye felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end as the words seemed to claw at her mind. It wasn't just a voice, it was a presence, a weight pressing down on her thoughts. The air around them thickened, as if the atmosphere itself was bending under the influence of something far older and more powerful than anything humanity had ever encountered. Mason's hand went to his sidearm, his fingers twitching nervously. "What the hell is that?" "It's in our heads." Faye swallowed hard, her breath shallow as she tried to stay focused. She could feel the pull, like the very gravity of the Devourer was warping their perception of reality. "It's speaking directly to us. The singularity. It's opened a doorway. It's not just communication. It's assimilation." "Assimilation," Mason echoed, his voice tight with confusion. The singularity was designed to isolate Earth, yes, but it also acted as a barrier, a shield, against this kind of telepathic intrusion. By opening the connection, we've let them in. The Devourer is now aware of everything. The crystalline core in the center of the room pulsed once more, sending waves of distortion through the chamber. On the console, lines of incomprehensible symbols began to scroll across the screen. Patterns that felt familiar, yet utterly alien. "The link is stronger than I thought," Faye murmured, staring at the symbols. She quickly ran her fingers over the console, trying to make sense of the shifting codes. "This isn't just a one-way transmission. The Devourer is trying to adapt to our systems. It's trying to merge with the singularity. Mason stepped closer, his face grim. If it merges with the singularity, what does that mean for us? We're already exposed. Faye's mind raced. The singularity had been Earth's greatest defense, but it was also an ancient, unstable technology. One that was never meant to be fully understood by humanity. If the Devourer succeeded in merging with it, Earth would be helpless. The combined force of both the singularity and the Devourer could bend reality itself, erasing Earth from existence, or worse, turning it into another feeding ground for the Devourer's endless hunger. They'll control everything, Faye said, a deep chill settling in her chest. The singularity can manipulate space-time. If the Devourer integrates with it, it won't just be able to consume Earth's resources. It'll consume time, space, us. We'll cease to exist. Mason's voice was steady but urgent. We need to stop this now. How do we shut it down? Faye's eyes flicked to the screen. The symbols were changing rapidly now, faster than she could track. The connection was deepening, and with each passing second, the presence of the Devourer grew stronger. The walls of the room seemed to pulse with it, and a low, deep growl, like the sound of a star collapsing, rumbled in the distance. We can't just shut it down, Faye said, her voice shaking. We'll destroy everything if we try. We need to sever the link, but we have to do it carefully. If we fail, Earth is gone. It's as simple as that. Mason's eyes burned with determination. Then we don't fail. Faye nodded, her hands already moving across the controls, searching for the emergency override. But the more she tried to stabilize the system, the more the interface fought back. It was like trying to hold on to an avalanche. No matter what she did, the Devourer's influence spread further into the system, warping everything it touched. Outside, the sky had darkened, the vast shadow of the Devourer's ship still looming above Earth. In the distance, there were flashes of light, massive explosions as humanity's defenses continued to clash with the alien invaders. But these were just distractions now. The real battle was inside the singularity itself, where Faye and Mason were fighting not just for Earth's survival, but for the survival of time and space as they knew it. Faye's breath came in ragged gasps as she continued to fight the console. Her fingers were blistering from the frantic input, but there was no time to slow down. The Devourer was waiting, and with every passing second, it grew stronger. And then, with a sudden flash, the screen blinked black. No, Faye whispered, feeling her heart stop. The console flickered back to life with a violent surge, the screen displaying nothing but a swirling mass of static and incoherent data. Faye's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to regain control, but the system was slipping further and further from her grasp. The presence of the Devourer was overwhelming, like an oppressive weight on her mind. A cold, ancient hunger that reached out and touched everything. Her thoughts, her memories, her very soul. Mason stood next to her, his hand on his weapon. But there was no enemy to shoot, just the system, the interface that now seemed alive, pulsing with malevolent intent. The walls of the room shook again, and the air itself seemed to hum with the Devourer's power, like the sound of the universe bending. We're running out of time, Mason said, his voice strained. If we don't disconnect the singularity now, Earth is done for. Faye's hands were shaking as she typed, but it wasn't enough. The symbols on the screen blurred, distorting into something incomprehensible as the Devourer's influence seeped into the system. The singularity had been designed to isolate Earth, to contain the universe's most dangerous entities, but now it was being twisted into a weapon, a gateway for the Devourer to enter this dimension and consume everything in its path. The voice of the Devourer came again, this time stronger, more insistent, a whisper inside Faye's skull. You cannot stop me. I have been waiting for the singularity to fail. Faye gritted her teeth, ignoring the voice that gnawed at her sanity. We have to stop you, she muttered under her breath, her fingers flying across the console in a desperate bid to reverse the connection. "We can't let you take Earth. We won't let you consume us." The screen flashed again, and then the words appeared, clear and terrifying. "You are already mine." Mason stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "Faye, don't listen to it. Focus on the failsafe. There has to be something, anything, to cut the link." Faye's fingers hovered over the final sequence, a hidden line of code buried deep within the Singularity's layers. If she activated it, the system would self-destruct, taking the Devourer with it. But it would also mean the end of Earth's isolation. The Singularity itself would be destroyed, and humanity would be exposed, completely vulnerable. It was a choice she never thought she'd have to make. She glanced at Mason, his eyes full of urgency, and knew there was no other option. There was no room for hesitation. If she didn't act, Earth would fall, and nothing would stop the Devourer from consuming everything. With a shaking breath, Faye slammed her hand down on the emergency override. The room shook violently, and a deafening noise filled her ears, like the sound of 1,000 stars being extinguished at once. The system began to shut down in a series of rapid, disorienting flashes. The core of the Singularity pulsed brighter and brighter until it was a blinding, searing light. And then, silence. Faye and Mason both staggered back, blinded by the light. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, leaving them in darkness. The oppressive weight that had filled the room was gone. Outside, the sky had cleared, the shadow of the devoured ship gone, as if it had never been there. Earth was free. But there was no time to celebrate. Faye's eyes flickered to the terminal once more. The screen was black, no signs of life, no data streams, just an empty void. They had done it. The Singularity had been destroyed, and the Devourer's link severed. Earth had won, for now. "We did it," Mason whispered, his voice hoarse with relief. Faye stood there, staring at the dead console, her hands still trembling. "Yeah, but for how long?" Epilogue. As the dust settled, the world began to rebuild, though the scars of the invasion were still fresh. The truth of the Devourer's existence and Earth's dangerous isolation remained buried, but Faye knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had felt the weight of humanity's defiance, and it wouldn't forget. The silence would return, but this time, Earth would be ready.